How's it going? Welcome to the Trades and Grades podcast. I'm your host, Noah Wright. Alongside me is Caleb Nemi. No Camden Gongwer tonight. He is at Holiday World. Never been to Holiday World. Heard it's a pretty nice place. He's maybe getting a little slip and slide action, maybe some water park for a roller coaster. I don't know, but unfortunately, he will not be with us tonight. We'll be missing his football insight and his comedic relief at times. Because he's something else in the hairline. So yeah, we got no Camden, but we will be moving on. This show is going to be. I'm excited for it. We're kind of moving out of the rookie draft stage of the off season, and we're moving into some of the this is a great time to look at your team and try and figure out what is my team looking like? How am I supposed to prepare for next year? What are some needs I need to fill going into next year? Obviously, we have some OTAs going on the last week or so, and moving on, and you'll have training camp, preseason in the next few months. The summer can get a little boring, but right now we're still going to figure out what is going to be how we can make our team better. And for this episode, we're going to be looking at contenders and specifically wide receiver position. What are some buys that Caleb and I think would be good for a contender moving into this next season?
Yeah. So just kind of kicking it off, I guess my number one buy, not number one, but my first buy that I'm going to bring to the table is going to be Brandon Cooks. Brandon Cooks is probably the most underrated wide receiver in the NFL right now. Currently on Underdog, he's got an ADP of around 58, which I think is absolutely too low considering the fact of what he does on a year in and year out basis. If we look on just kind of his stats, he puts up about 1,000 yards with a I would say crappy quarterback play. I know he had Deshaun Watson for 1 year, but he switches quarterbacks all the time, and he's always puts up about 1,000 yards and 6 touchdowns. If we look like the last 2 years, last year on a points per game basis, he was the wide receiver 19. In 2020, he was the wide receiver 17. He got hurt in 2019, so I'm not going to count that. But he was the wide receiver 19 in 2018 as well. So he's just always a top 20 wide receiver, and he's super cheap because everyone always thinks that he has a concussion problem and that he's old, but he's really not that old. He's only 28 years old. So you could probably go trade for him for an early second, maybe a mid second, to someone that potentially is holding him that's rebuilding or is looking to trade assets. So definitely go get yourself some Brandon Cooks. He's got year 2 of Davis Mills, and I think he's a smash.
Yeah, I think that is it's kind of odd. I agree with you that it seems like he's kind of been known as someone who had some injury issues with the concussions, and he did in 2019. He's with the Rams. He actually played technically in 14 games that season. So in his let's see, outside of his rookie year, in the 1, 2, 3, 4, in the 7 years that he's been in the league, he's only missed 4 games, and a couple of those were concussions in 2019. So I think he's one of the most reliable, if not the most reliable, wide receiver in the NFL, really, especially in fantasy. Maybe not from a football perspective. Not going to grade him, the prospect, but in terms of fantasy football, 1,000 yards in 6 of his seasons. Out of 8 seasons he's played, and one of them was concussion, and the other one is his rookie year. So yeah, this was one that you stole it from me. So I was upset. I saw that you put that on there. I figured I gave you first dibs, but no, I absolutely love this move. If you're a contender, looking at wide receivers that you're trying to, I mean, this is a guy that's probably going to be a wide receiver. If you're a contender, probably wide receiver 3, borderline maybe wide receiver 4, probably closer to 4, depending on how big variation. But if you're going vanilla league where you get 2 or 3 wide receiver starts and a couple flexes, he's probably looking at wide receiver 4 on your team if you're contending, and this would be fantastic wide receiver 4 if you can get him. And right now, personally, I think the market is probably about a 23 second, maybe early second. From I don't know, maybe early second this year, late first this year. Um, I really feel like he's very I don't know why he's perceived as someone that's just kind of like an afterthought, because I mean he puts up numbers. He might not be super flashy, but yeah, that's kind of where I'm at. I think if I'm a contender, I'm easily paying a 23 second. What about you?
Yeah. for sure. 23 second. If you haven't had your rookie draft, I'd prefer to trade a 2022 second.
hundred
But
percent.
yeah, depends just what's happening in your league. But you could probably also there's some other maybe a younger player. I'm trying to think of someone off the top of my head. Maybe someone like kind of also too like if you are actually contending, like someone in the Brandon Ayuk range where, um, you know, hey, I could probably trade Brandon Ayuk, get Brandon Cooks, and you might even be able to get something else on top of Brandon Cooks where you're tearing down for maybe one of the younger receivers that doesn't have that same production profile that Brandon Cooks is going to give you this year. Because I think sometimes we do, especially when you're contending, like you're scared to give up your younger assets, but at the same time, like there's no guarantee that those younger assets are going to produce like someone like a Brandon Cooks has done consistently year after year.
Yeah, so I'm in the Dynasty Nerds trade finder right now. And here's a couple of trades that I think are interesting. So if Brandon Cooks and a 23 third for a 23 second and Jalen Tolbert. I'd be smashing that all day. I'm not disliking Jalen Tolbert. I think he could be a good sleeper maybe this year, but I would definitely do that. Another one's Brandon Cooks for AJ Dillon, just straight up. Another one, if you're a contender, you really have. I mean, AJ Dillon would be good. Like running. I mean, again, running back 4. I guess he's not a bad running back, but I'd much rather have somebody that's proven he can be a top 15, even top 12 at times wide receiver. So there's just a couple of things to keep in mind. Those I'd definitely be doing some of those trades. Um, but yeah, we'll go ahead and move on to my first wide receiver buy for contender. It is Allen Robinson, newly removed. He pretty much, he pretty much wasn't even on the Bears last year. Let's be honest, he didn't even show up. I don't know. I think he pretty much just mentally checked out. But he's now in the Rams in a very high-powered offense. You have Stafford throwing for the third most passing yards in the NFL, and you saw Cooper Kupp have an absolutely ridiculous season. So I'm pretty happy with that landing spot for him. Looking back, it's been a while since Robinson's really made any noise in fantasy football. 2020, he was wide receiver 9 on the year. And the previous year, he was wide receiver 7, and that's with Mitchell Trubisky. So I don't know, like, this is no knock on Trubisky because I feel like he gets a lot of crap. But I mean, if you're wide receiver 7 with Mitchell Trubisky, I feel like that says a lot about you. And so I'd be very happy right now if I'm looking at Allen Robinson and I'm a contender. I'd be paying a late first, early second all day. I think he has the upside. I think he personally might have more upside than Brandon Cooks. Actually, I would say that for a fact he does, even though it's been a while. I think they're the same age. Maybe Allen Robinson's a little bit older, maybe like 29. I'm not for sure. But I think Cooks is 20, is he 28 or
28.
something?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think Allen Robinson is going to turn 29 during the season.
Yeah, I mean they probably both be close. So I think they're relatively the same age, kind of same points of their career. But I think the difference between maybe Brandon Cooks and Allen Robinson is the QB play at that point, between Stafford and Mills, which I'm guessing that's who they're going to roll out. So I think he's a decent quarterback. He's kind of a sleeper as well if you're in a super flex league. I kind of like Davis Mills. So, but yeah, that's how I feel about Allen Robinson. I think he'd be a great buy for a contender.
Yeah, I think if you look at the way, he's just going to be sliding right into that Robert Woods role, which Robert Woods, before he got injured last year on the Rams, was the wide receiver 12. So he was a wide receiver 1, even though if you were a Robert Woods owner, you were probably just ticked because you probably drafted him ahead of Cooper Kupp in any of your redraft leagues. But I'm excited to see what Allen Robinson can do. I don't think he's going to get the 150 targets that he got when he was playing with Mitch Trubisky. But let's be clear, even if he does get 120 targets from Matthew Stafford, those 120 targets are going to be way more quality and better than the 150 targets that he was getting from Mitch Trubisky. I think Allen Robinson's easily going to smash as a top. He's going to at least be a wide receiver 2 this year, so top 24. I would go as high to say probably wide receiver 15 or 16 range. But like I said, I haven't even done my own rankings for redraft this year yet, so still to be determined. But yeah, I think Allen Robinson's a great buy.
Yeah, I mean that's a good point. I mean he's pretty much just going to come right in and be a Robert Woods. Looking at Robert Woods' stats outside of this past year, obviously he got injured in the middle of the year, but the three previous years he was wide receiver 13, 14, and 11. Pretty consistent, all with the Rams. After really not being notable at all in Buffalo for 4 years straight, he was in he didn't really do much at all. So you get put in that offense, and you have the talent like Al Robinson. This is gonna be the most talented quarterback down Robinson that has probably ever had. Actually, I'm sure it is because he's been on Jacksonville for 3 years, and he had I think Blake Bortles for majority of those probably, and then been in Chicago and has had a plethora of pretty mediocre quarterbacks. So I'm excited for Robinson. Like you said, I think he could be. This might be a hotter take, but I think he could be a top 10 in redraft this year, wide receivers. So you got to look out for that. But yeah, you just go ahead and we'll move on to your second contender
Second
buy.
one, well, we kind of already talked about him. Robert Woods is my second contender buy, and I think the main thing with Robert Woods, so he tore that ACL super late. I am a big proponent of if you're drafting a wide receiver, I like to draft these guys year 2 removed from an ACL injury. Um, but I think with Robert Woods is a little bit different, just because he really, if you think about the way he wins, he's never been athletic at all. So even if he loses a second or 2 seconds even on his 40, not going to matter. And he's not big, so he's not like going up and grabbing it over you. He's just really crafty, and that's not going to change just because he tore an ACL. If we look at kind of his last few years, last year he only played 9 games before he tore the ACL, but like I kind of said earlier, he was still a wide receiver 1 during that time. In 2020, on a points per game basis, he was averaging 15 points a game, and that was like the wide receiver 19 on a points per game basis. And then he was wide receiver 12 in 2019, averaging about 15 points a game. And so I think too, he's going to the Tennessee Titans. You're thinking, oh, he's now competing with Treylon Burks. Like, how many targets they don't throw the ball? I think they're going to have to throw the ball a lot more this year. Derrick Henry's getting up in age. He's now 28. They're not going to be able to just ground and pound. And I don't know. I think he's still going to get his 120 to 130 targets. He's going to be a high-end wide receiver too. And you can probably trade for him for a back-end second, maybe even a third if someone's really concerned about his age and the injury.
Yeah, no, I'm on the same page. I'm actually watching a video right now because I remember seeing it on Twitter. I looked it up. A video of him running routes, and he's
Yes.
at OTAs, and he's got the knee brace on, but he looks great running cones. So yeah, I mean, I'm on the Robert Woods train. I agree. I think that the situation Tennessee will be interesting. A lot of people think that Burks is going to come in there, have the same AJ Brown role, and kind of forgetting that Woods is there. And I think that probably a second rounder will do it. I think in 23 seconds, probably right. I mean, all these are kind of 23 seconds, maybe a late first. I mean, if you could try and get them, if you can trade like a mid second from this year, or a late second, I think that's probably reasonable in a rookie draft. Sometimes, I mean, most rookie drafts are probably over by now, but sometimes that rookie draft like mindset fever where you're in the draft and you're just like, oh, like it doesn't make any sense, but you just want to draft some of these rookies just because you have a good feeling like maybe they'll pop off. That's where you capitalize on people where they're just like looking for picks, even though it seems kind of silly. And you get people like Robert Woods who puts up those numbers where he's never going to be a top 5 wide receiver, but his floor is so high that it makes it worth a second rounder. So, yeah, I agree with that. I think it'll be interesting to see where he fits in Tennessee. But I do like that quite a bit. I mean, I feel like all of these are kind of older wide receivers that are just kind of like discounts because of the age, and so many people now with all these wide receiver classes we've had the last couple of years are kind of spoiled, and so you have this plethora of young wide receivers we have in the league, and all these older ones that still put up good numbers, getting discounted. Like your Robert Woods, they're beating out the CD Lambs, but I mean, you can buy how many Robert Woods with CD Lamb. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
it's crazy the difference. Obviously, I mean, there's a reason because CD Lamb's obviously a star and he's 22 or 23, whatever he is, and but move on to the next one. This guy, I think, is the oldest, maybe the oldest on this list. Maybe he's tied with Robert Woods. I don't know. It's Keenan Allen, 30 years old. Keenan Allen is probably, and we were talking about Cooks as being the most consistent. Keenan Allen's got to be up there, if not maybe more so. Looking at, actually, probably is more so. Looking at his last 5 years, he's put up 5 wide receiver 1 years in a row. He's had wide receiver 3. This is dating back to 2017. Wide receiver 3, 12, 6. Okay, I guess in PPR is 14. so just outside, and then 10. So he is about as consistent as it comes, and you just don't hear a ton about him. But he's one of those guys that's like gonna win you a championship when you're buying these. You know what I mean? Like I don't think he's probably quite in the 23 second range. I think you probably are still gonna have to pay a late first. I wouldn't pay 23 first, I don't think. That would be kind of steep for me personally, unless you're absolute. That's like a move where you're in week 12 and you have a guy go down and you trying to win a chip. That I think that's the only scenario in which I could maybe pay 23 first, but even like that's pretty. You would have to almost guarantee me a championship for me to do that. But that's where I'm going. If you can get him for like in a rookie draft, dream scenario, rookie draft at the 108 or 109, and I can trade that for Keenan Allen, and I'm a contender. You probably won't have that. You probably have like the 111 or 112 because you just won or something like that. But if you have for some reason a 108 or 19 or 110, and you can pull that off, I would do that 100% because I feel like the cliff right after that rookie draft, and we'll talk about one QB because you maybe throw in Kenny Pickett in Superflex, but a one QB after that 107 and kind of like Olave, Jameson Williams, just drops off to Sky Moore. No offense to Sky Moore. I mean, he could ball out, but I'm just not there. That would be where I'm looking to buy, somebody like Keenan Allen, who he's got a couple years left on his contract, so he's not going to be just like straight cliff off. And he's tied to Justin Herbert. So, I mean, that's not a bad thing.
No, and he doesn't like kind of we were talking about with Brandon Cooks and kind of Robert Woods. Keenan Allen doesn't win because he's just the most athletic guy out there, and he's bigger than everybody, and he's just able to go up and get it. Like, dude's just a smooth route runner, and he's tied to Justin Herbert. Like, that's all you need to know. And he's under contract, so they're not going to cut him. So I think, especially with these guys, like we saw the Julio Jones cliff happen. And so I think a lot of people, you get scared because they're like, Julio Jones, he was like a once in a generation type wide receiver, and he fell off at age 32. But I think with Keenan Allen, there's a lot of guys that are still like Julian Edelman was still putting up like wide receiver 2 numbers at 34. So I think Keenan Allen fits that mold, and especially when you're tied to that young superstar quarterback, like easy buy, especially this year after the 107. I'm taking that. I wouldn't trade it. I'm not prone to trade 23 first, like you said, unless you're guaranteed a chip, especially midseason. But depending on where you're at, and if you think Keenan Allen's it, like he's definitely going to be worth it for sure.
Yeah. So there's I want to bring up a trade scenario that I found in the Trade Finder. So this one is like I would do this. I can't even explain. Like I jumped through the screen of my phone to press this. It's Keenan Allen and a 24 second for Kadarius Toney and Rashad White. I like Rashad White fine. I'm not in on Toney, but to get Keenan Allen in, I mean, contender situation, you give up those two pieces and you get a second, which obviously it's going to be a little down the road, but that is like an all time smash, except for me. I don't know about you, but
Oh, for sure. I can't even believe they got the second.
I know. Yeah, that's and obviously you're gonna have some flawed trades, but here's another one: Keenan Allen for 23 second and 24 second. That seems like
Easy.
decently reasonable. Still doing Keenan Allen, and it's not.
Yeah.
I don't have to think about it, but that seems like a more reasonable type trade.
Well, especially if you're
Curtis
contending.
Samuel.
Yeah.
Sorry, no one's Curtis Samuel in a 22 second for Keenan Allen. These can you're doing that all day long.
Yeah. No, for sure. Those are all smashes. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's my second one. Why don't you go ahead and hit off your third buy?
My third buy is Mike Evans. Now, Mike Evans has been slowly but surely climbing ADP. Around, I would say, maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago, if you were drafting on Underdog, you would probably be able to get him somewhere, I would say, like mid-third round. He's climbed all the way up to now. He's going around like overall pick 19, which, to be honest, I think is a little high. It's kind of risky, but I still think if you're competing, he's going to be a buy for a few reasons. We know the analysis has hyped on it. All fantasy experts have talked about it. Dude is 1,000 yards, 10 touchdowns every single year. And he is getting up there in age. And I think that's the reason that you're going to be able to get that discount. in Dynasty. He's going to be 29 this year, but as always, this year he's not going to have to compete with Antonio Brown because his target share has been going down. I think last year he only had like a 16% target share. But like we kind of, I think Noah's going to talk about someone else on the team. They only signed Russell Gage. We don't know what's going to happen with Rob Gronkowski. I mean, you still have Leonard Fournette catching out of the backfield. And Chris Godwin with his ACL tear injury is probably not going to be back until week 8, week 9. I don't think enough people are talking about that. I think people think he's just going to, because he was like walking after he tore his ACL, that he's somehow going to be able to be back by the beginning of the season, but he's probably not. So I just think Mike Evans is going to at least command a 25% target share, more than he's ever had with like a competent quarterback. I mean, I know Jameis Winston was Hail Marying it up to him and he was a baller that year, but like last year he was on a points per game basis. He was wide receiver 10. So he was a wide receiver 1 with 16 points a game. I just think that's going to go up. I think he's probably going to average somewhere around 17 to 18. And those are the type of people you need. So he's got the floor, but we also know like Mike Evans, those like high games where he scores 2 or 3 touchdowns and that gives you like 45 points, like those win you weeks. And so he's like the perfect like floor, but has like the upside ceiling. So not going to be surprised if this year he ends up as like the wide receiver 8, wide receiver 7, and you probably only are going to have to pay a late first to get him. Most people are off him at this point with the age and his kind of his body type and being a bigger wide receiver, knowing how those wide receivers tend to fall off. I just think it's an easy buy for a contender.
Yep. No, I agree. And I'm glad you brought that up because I was gonna bring that up anyway about Chris Godwin. Yeah, he had the ACL tear. Obviously, now that's a pretty common injury anymore, and people are hopefully starting to get back from those a little bit quicker than they would have maybe 10 years ago. But it's still a significant injury. It'll be a little bit, it'll take a while to come back from. I agree. I think it'll be middle of the season probably for Chris Godwin. They haven't given a timetable, but the coaching staff really hasn't been too positive about it. They've came out this past week, started talking about a little bit. They said they really don't know. And usually you'd like to hear something like they're a little bit ahead of schedule, they're doing well. I feel like that happens a lot, which is kind of coach speak, but these guys are more like, we don't even know. So yeah, no, I think Evans will be at the worst case scenario. If you can get a late first from this draft class, that's nice. But I would do that if I was contender. But a worst case scenario is you get Mike Evans for the first 7 or 8 weeks, and your team isn't where you thought it would be. You at least, I mean, in my opinion, I think he's probably going to be one of the best wide receivers, and he's going to have the best opportunity to be one of the best wide receivers in football because it's him and Russell Gage. And obviously, Leonard Fournette took a lot of receptions as well, but he's going to have such a good opportunity those first until Chris Godwin comes back to be an absolute stud. I mean, he could be a top 5 wide receiver in the, especially in redraft, he'd be a good value. But he could be a top 5 wide receiver those first 7 8 weeks, maybe 9 weeks. Just depends how long Godwin takes to get back. And if your team isn't where you think it would be, you could probably flip it to a contender for at least what you get out of it, if not more. So I'm in on that type of trade. I think the age is probably scaring people off as well. If he's on a team, even though he's 28, he's just had. I mean, he's right around exactly where these other guys are. You could probably build a team. I mean, honestly, if I was in enough leagues, and I'm getting moderately there, if I was in enough leagues, I'd probably just go out and just take all the seconds that I have, and maybe a couple first, and just buy 5, like all these buys and all these 28-year-old receivers, and then I'd win a championship because they'd all be wide receiver 1s, even though they would be ancient. And then like in 2 years, my team would be terrible for the next 5 years because I'd have nobody on my team, but I'd still win a championship because all these guys are right where this, cliff starts to come into play. But Mike Evans, I mean, it's just ridiculous looking through and seeing he's never had in his 8 years in the league, he's never been worse than wide receiver 22 and as high as wide receiver 2. So yeah, I'm in on Mike Evans. I think for a contender, that'd be an excellent buy, especially like I said, this first couple of weeks.
For sure.
So we'll move on. Same team, not going too far. This is my last offseason contender wide receiver buy. And it's teammates with Mike Evans. It's not Chris Godwin, as we talked about. Russell Gage. It's kind of a weird one. I've never been a huge fan of Russell Gage, but I think that this opportunity presented to him will be something that we saw in Atlanta, and he proved himself, in my opinion, in Atlanta. So Russell Gage is 26 years old. Last year, he's wide receiver 38, so you can get him, I'm assuming, relatively cheap. I don't know what his ADP is going for at the moment. It might be higher than you probably would like for wide receiver 38. He's probably outplaying that ADP, but he saw 94 targets last year, 770 yards with Matt Ryan. No offense to Matt Ryan, needs to have a little bit better of a quarterback than Tom Brady, even though I think Matt Ryan's a solid quarterback. But the big thing is the last half of the year. So the first half, it was just kind of a mess. You had, whatever's going on with Calvin Ridley, and they're just trying to figure out the offense. Then they have Cordell Patterson in the mix, and they just a kind of a funky bunch. But the last 7 weeks, he averaged 16.5 points per game, which would have been at wide receiver 11 on the year had you extrapolated that. Now, obviously, you could do that for a lot of different people in different scenarios, so I'm not going to try and pretend like he could have been that. But he certainly played a lot better than a wide receiver 38. I mean, he played to the extent of a wide receiver 2 type season, at least if he hadn't had. I mean, there's some weird stuff going on at the beginning of the year. So 16.5 points per game those last 7 weeks, he played great. And now you put him in a position where he's a wide receiver 2 on offense led by Tom Brady, and you have alongside, the other side of the field, he's got Mike Evans, take some of the pressure off where he doesn't. I mean, he had Kyle Pitts in Atlanta, but he's still a rookie, so you can't expect a ton out of a rookie like that. But you have a veteran on their side, some of the way. You have a friend in the backfield who's also going to, it's almost helpful. He's going to take receptions away. I understand that much, but that's another weapon that the defense is going to have to keep in mind. So I think for a contender, very, very cheap buy. A late second, probably you're getting them for. I don't think you can get them for a third, maybe 2/3. If you could try 2/3, you may be able to get it done. But I'm thinking probably a second, like most of these. And he's the youngest one, I think, out of all the ones that they've given so far. So that's kind of where I'm at with Russell Gage.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna push back a little bit. I don't think I'm necessarily thinking that I would want to buy Russell Gage, just because I don't even know if he's more talented, honestly, than Tyler Johnson or Brashad Perriman. But I do think he had a killer end of the season, like you kind of were saying, with the Falcons. I don't know if it's necessarily just because the Falcons' offense was so bad and there wasn't anyone else to throw to, or if it's just because he did have I think he was averaging like 3 yards of separation. So I just mentioned Tyler Johnson. I think last year he only averaged like 2.8. But I think it'll just be interesting to see. I think the other guys would be free under waiver wire. So that's the only reason I'm pushing back against you. But I do think if with the Chris Godwin being out, Tom Brady has to throw to somebody, and Tom Brady likes his small receivers that play in the slot, and that is exactly what Russell Gage is.
Yeah, I know. And after whenever Chris Godwin comes back, I don't see him really having that big of a role. So it's more getting those wins early in the season, not so much the other ones where it's like kind of flip flop where they're trying to win you a championship. Obviously, if you're a contender, you're trying to win a championship. But if you can get to the point where you're getting in the first half of the season, or maybe you have Chris Godwin, and this is kind of a play to ease that off, where you're pretty much getting a discounted Chris Godwin at the beginning of the season, and until he gets back, and then you can play plug and play, which is basically just like a mini Chris Godwin, obviously a lot less talented, but in that type of role where you can get those points because you're just trying to win as many games as possible, so you can get to that bye and not have the scenario in which you accidentally lose the first round, even though you're one of the best teams, just because it's an off week. You're trying to get that 1 or 2 pick. And I think winning those games at the beginning of the year is going to be essential. So this might not be one of those picks where, you're going to be like, wow, I'm glad I had him. He won me the championship, but he might have gotten you to the outside of the first round, got you that bye. So yeah, no, it's definitely not one of the flashiest ones, but that's one thing I was looking at, trying to figure out, who might be somebody that's not real well known and has an opportunity to be able to bring you some wins. So you go ahead and throw down your last buy.
So my last buy, to no surprise, I think everyone's been harping on this one, is Cortland Sutton. Main reason I threw him as my buy, I heard he was eating breakfast with Russell Wilson in the morning. So I heard that when that happens, that really helps with the overall projection. So I think I'm just projecting wide receiver one. Once I heard that, I was like, oh, breakfast equals wide receiver one, based on the Cooper Cup, Matthew Stafford relationship. But I think with the thing with Cortland Sutton, so I kind of harped on this earlier. This is going to be year 2 removed from the ACL. So all that explosion, all that, he's figured it out now, to being back to the athlete he was pre-injury, and he gets the upgraded quarterback. Competition for targets. I mean, you still have Jerry Judy there. They got rid of Noah Fant, so everyone's hyping up Albert O, but we don't actually know. Um, they still got the running backs, but Russell Wilson, one of his main reasons that he was unhappy in Seattle and he wanted to leave was that they wouldn't let Russ cook, wouldn't let him throw the ball more than like 30 times a game. And so I think Denver's definitely going to open it up, and I expect them to be throwing the ball, I would say, top half of the league this year, for sure. So looking at just kind of the way he hasn't ever had like an amazing season. I think the best season he had, he was like wide receiver 27. Um, but we also have to remember who was throwing him the ball. He had Joe Flacco, Drew Lock, and Teddy Bridgewater. Like, this guy hasn't really had an elite level quarterback. So I'm excited to see what he can do. We saw what Russell Wilson did with, Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf. Same's going to be true with what he's going to do with Cortland Sutton and Jared Judy, because honestly, I think this is a bold take, but Cortland Sutton is very much so the same, not as athletic as DK Metcalf because he's a freak, but he's a really big athlete, but he's got way better route running. And when you pair that with a guy that just is a top 10 NFL quarterback, like, it's going to be chef's kiss. So, and you're not having to pay up for him, really. I think right now he is going as the overall 47 on ADP on Underdog. So he's gone up 14 spots in like the last 2 weeks. So he is steadily climbing the draft boards. But I mean, if you get him as your wide receiver 3 on your redraft team, or you have him, of course, on your dynasty team, and you're looking to trade for him as a wide receiver 3, like, he has so much upside to become a top, wide receiver 1 or even a high end wide receiver 2. And you're probably only going to have to spend back end first to get him, and he just turned 27, so you're still going to have like 3 years of just elite play from him.
Yeah, I'm looking at Fantasy Pros ADP. It's for Dynasty. So they have him at wide receiver 34. And that's got like quite a few people, like, Michael Thomas is ranked 1 ahead of him. Darnell Mooney, I like Mooney fine, but quite a few rookies. Chris Olave, Jameson Williams. They have Devontae Smith up there. Amon-Ra St. Brown over Cortland Sutton, which I find really, really gross, just because of the way that the Lions are right now. And the fact that they moved up just to get Jameson Williams, and you go on forever about that. So I think that's weird. But I agree. I think that Sutton, based off of this, now when you were talking, I personally felt, and this is based off of the way that I guess maybe my timeline algorithm, the way that I've been able to see information, I see a lot of people high on Sutton. So I would have thought that he would have been, pretty, maybe like a wide receiver 20 area. And I probably wouldn't be buying at that point. But to see him at wide receiver 34 on Fantasy Pros, you probably have to go to like KTC, or no, yeah, keep trade cut. If you go in there, I'm gonna go in there and see right now what his value is. That's probably more accurate description of how people see him, because I feel like that's supposed to be the community's way of telling you what these players are. So I'm gonna go look and see what he is for wide receiver. But I think that either of these, Jerry Judy or Cortland Sutton, are both buys, I guess. I don't know what I'm exactly buying for. I think they're probably worth almost exactly what I'm buying them for. Maybe they'll be a little bit better than what I think, but I think they're going to be top, 20 wide receivers. I think it's pretty much preference. I like Sutton a little bit more than Jerry Judy. So I'm perfectly fine with getting Sutton. I don't know if I'm going to be able to get a super great value. Okay, I'm trying to find Cortland Sutton right now. They have wide receiver 34. So, I mean, Brandon Ayuk's above him. Sky Moore's above him. That's That's pretty crazy to me. I wouldn't say. I mean, right now Drake London's at wide receiver 12. So there you go with your Drake London. That's pretty crazy.
I just think you have to also like you would think that his ADP would just go flying up once that Russell Wilson news dropped, but it really
Yeah,
hasn't. It went up a little bit, but I'm when I heard the Podfather talk about Cortland Sutton like it was his long lost son and just described, I mean, it just convinced me. I'm planting my flag right there alongside the Podfather that
yeah,
Cortland Sutton's going to come back to relevance, and it's just such an easy buy.
yeah. To put in perspective, we're talking about DK Metcalf. So Cortland Sutton's 6'4", Metcalf's 6'4", Metcalf's 235, Sutton's like 215, 216, so 20 pounds difference. But he's similar-ish build where he's not as, freak athlete, but he is 6'4". He's a big body. He plays that type of role like DK did in Seattle. So yeah, I'm just looking through these right now, like how I mean, right now, I mean, right below Sutton is Mike Williams and Keenan Allen. I was gonna do Mike Williams as a buy, but I figured if I did Keenan Allen, I can't do both of them as buys. But that's a free one. That's a freebie right there. That's Mike
Freebie, yeah,
Williams.
both of them are buys.
Um, I don't. I'm just all I'm gonna say is he's tied to Justin Herbert for the next like 3 years or whatever it is. So that alone, and they didn't get a wide receiver notable in this past class. So yeah, I'd be fine with Sutton, especially at wide receiver 34. I mean, at that point, you're definitely not getting more than a second. Even perceived, like to me, I'm not. If I see Cortland Sutton, someone's handing me a second, I'm not accepting that. Um, but I feel like at this point, if you're people are saying he's wide receiver 34, that's what the dynasty community is saying. That's a second rounder to me, and that's not a great second rounder either. So I'm doing that all day.
Yeah,
But
and
yeah,
the other thing, my last point with Cortland Sutton too is he's like this best season in 2019. He only had 6 receiving touchdowns, like 6 for a guy that's 6'4", like
right,
that was
right,
playing majority of the snaps, and he has
yeah,
like tons of like he's averaging like 1,500 air yards a season, like this dude is ready to pop. It just hasn't
yeah,
happened because his quarterback play has been terrible and he got injured. So
yep,
we just hope that this year it finally comes together. And like we said, if all of a sudden he still hits that like 1,000 receiving yards or like 1,100 receiving yards, but his touchdowns go from 6 to 10, which Russ is probably going to throw for 40 at least. It's an easy buy.
yep, absolutely. Well, there you have it. There's our buys for contenders. Wide receivers, the 2022 season. Hopefully, they will be of some use. We'll find out, I guess, in a couple months when the season kicks off when we get going. But appreciate you guys listening. Don't forget to go like and subscribe on YouTube. Follow on Spotify. Subscribe on Apple Podcasts. Please leave a review if you enjoyed the show. If you didn't enjoy the show, please don't leave a review. I guess maybe just like peacefully move on. But no, thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.